Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to show you how I faux bricked this random column in the middle of our kitchen, dining, and living space. So I've mentioned that we recently moved into a new house, and because I am the way that I am, I immediately came in here and started seeing a few things that I wanted to change. Since this weird column was like right in the middle of our most used spaces in the house, I decided that it was top of the list. It's not structural, so I'm not really sure why they put it here, except that maybe they just wanted a divider between the kitchen and the dining and the living space. And I also think that they might have needed a few places to put a couple of light switches. Speaking of light switches, that was the main reason we decided not to just remove the column altogether. It was more hassle than it was really worth to us, so we just decided to make it a feature instead of an eyesore. And I did that with just a couple sheets of faux brick paneling. So if you guys are ready to see how this column went from this to this, let's go. While we head out to the shop, I want to tell you about our video sponsor, GlassesUSA.com. Since my new shop is detached from the house, I was constantly running in and out, and my eyes were just having a really hard time adjusting. I didn't want to be swapping between sunglasses and regular glasses all the time, so I ordered a pair of transition lenses from GlassesUSA.com to use as my dedicated shop glasses. Transition lenses are designed to darken when exposed to UV light outdoors, but still stay transparent when using indoors. GlassesUSA.com offers over 9,000 prescription eye and sunglass options from in-house brands like Muse and Amelia E to designer brands like Ray-Ban and Oakley. And they're at 70% off retail prices. Since they start out at only $30 for basic lenses, I ended up getting a few pair. One transition pair for dedicated shop use, one pair with blue light filters to help me when I'm editing video, and if you aren't familiar with blue light glasses, using blue light filters during screen time, whether you need a prescription or not, will help reduce eye strain, decrease headaches, and improves your sleep. And then, just for fun, I threw in a pair of regular glasses and sunglasses just for going out. With so many frame options, their website lets you virtually try on the glasses with their try-on tool to help you make your decision. You just take or upload a photo, position the X's over your eyes, and try them on. Check out the links in the description to see what GlassesUSA.com has to offer. All right, now let's get building. For this project, I used 3 sheets of this faux brick paneling from the Home Depot. If you haven't ever seen or felt of this stuff before, it's surprisingly realistic, but it's made of like MDF and paper. I've used it once before to make a fake fireplace that turned out pretty good, so I figured I would try it again here. It's cheaper than faux brick tiles, a lot easier to install, and a lot easier to remove later if I change my mind. So the first thing I did for this project was to grab my tape measure from the shop and measure all sides of this column. It's kind of an odd L shape and not just a big square, so I wanted to measure all of the sides so I could best lay out my cuts. I decided to start on the inside smaller pieces first. Before I cut or installed anything, I first removed the baseboard trim around the bottom of the column. I'll replace this later. The hardest part of this project was just trying to lay out the cuts so that the pattern was kind of centered. This will just help it look more realistic. So I know this is fake brick, and you're probably going to be able to tell that this is fake brick, but I want to make this look as realistic as possible. So I need a 21 1/8 inch wide strip for the wall. Now I want, since I'm going to be cutting this along this brick, I want this brick width to be about the same as this, so at least it looks like it's like centered. I've marked 21 1/8 right here, and I'm gonna mark this right here. So I'm gonna cut this first at this mark, which is 22 3/4. And then I'll come back and cut off this little piece right here so I can get my full 21 1/8 inch wide piece so that these are centered. For the inside of the column, the 2 walls were the same width, so I used my circular saw and Craig rip cut to rip 2 strips from one panel to the first measurement. Then I adjusted to the final width and trimmed these again so that the brick pattern would be centered on the sheet. So these boards are 96 1/4 inches tall, and my ceiling is like exactly 96. So I don't want to be having to like beat this in place and break something. I'm gonna be putting baseboard around the bottom and some kind of trim around the top anyway, so I'm just gonna go ahead and cut off like half a brick here on each of these panels before I install it, just to give me some wiggle room up and down. With my first piece cut, I headed inside and just used some brad nails to attach it. I butted the smooth factory edge of all of these pieces to the ceiling and left the rough end that I trimmed with a jigsaw at the bottom. Now, the instructions say to use a construction adhesive, and that's probably best, but just in case I didn't love this or I want to change it in a year from now because I'm incredibly indecisive, I just kept it simple and brad nailed it into the wall studs behind the sheetrock. After the first piece was in, I double checked my measurement for the second side and measured a cutout for the light switch. I just used a jigsaw to cut that out and then carefully nailed it in place. I used a stud finder to find the stud locations to nail into, and you'll see this a little bit better later. And I was actually surprised that it still worked through the panels. I added several nails into the edges and into the stud in the middle from the top to the bottom of the panel. Once I had both of the inside pieces attached with brad nails, I moved to the outside. Now these pieces are going on the outside. This time it's 25 and 7/8. There's a little variation from the top to the bottom on the column, so I kind of found the middle ground. Well, hello. So anyway, I'm gonna do the same thing that I did before, just 25 versus 21. You're the worst. Don't bite me. Don't. For each piece that I cut, I tried to cut again so that the pattern was centered side to side. Since the outside pieces were more than 24 inches wide and my rip cut only goes to 24 inches, I cut off the smaller piece of the sheet first with the circular saw, and then I made the final cut on the table saw. And you'll notice here that the blade is a little too low, so I actually had to run this through the second time to cut all the way through. Anyway, just like the other panels, I trimmed half a brick off the bottom for some wiggle room and then carried it back inside to check the fit. I nailed this in place again using several brad nails up and down the column. Then I measured to cut out the light switch on the other side and cut this out with the jigsaw. By the way, for the light switches, you have a couple of options. They make extenders that you can add onto your existing boxes to kind of push the switches out after adding the faux brick panel. It's what a lot of people use after installing backsplashes or tile on the wall. Or you can loosen the switches, cut your hole a little tight, slide the panel behind them, and then tighten them back up so that they're on the outside of the panel. There are other options too, but those are probably the easiest, and I'm not in a position to give you any electrical advice, so you can do what you feel most comfortable doing. I just nailed this last big panel in place, then all that was left was the two narrow strips to go on the edges of the L shape. You'll notice that I tried to make each corner so that if a row ended on a whole brick, it quote-unquote wrapped around the corner to a half brick. This isn't vital, but it's just a little detail that helps make it look a little more realistic. I'm not a huge fan of the plain red brick, so I dressed this up a little once I had all the pieces in place. This was definitely the most fun part of the entire project for me. I laid out some plastic on the floor to protect it and grabbed a bucket of drywall mud that I had left over from sheetrocking the shop. I used a plastic putty knife and just smeared mud all over the bricks. The panels already had some texture and some dimples in the brick, and the mud kind of filled those in. I scraped most of this off, but the film and mud that remained gave it a nice color that's a little more interesting than the plain panel. Of course, this step is totally optional, but it's nice to use to smooth out the joints where the corners meet. I covered all the sides, and there's no science to this. You just smear it around and scrape off the excess. And then for the corners, I just filled them in and tried to kind of square them off with the putty knife. They're definitely not perfect, but bricks normally aren't, and it blends in pretty well. Once everything was covered, I let it sit for about 2 days to get dry, and then I came back and just knocked off any chunks left over with some sandpaper. If you wanted more red to show through, you can lightly sand the entire surface to knock off some more of the drywall mud. Just don't sand too much or you'll sand through the paper on the brick panel. To finish this project, I just cut to fit some trim pieces for the top and the bottom of the column. I nailed 1x6s around the bottom as a baseboard and 1x4s around the top for trim. And I'll be 100% honest with you here, I think that the baseboard looks fine, but I kind of wish that I hadn't put the 1x4 at the top. One day I may come back and replace it. In hindsight, it might have been kind of cool to cut apart some of the leftover brick and line the top with them running vertically. Or since the panel was butted to the ceiling already, I could have just left it as is. But I added this trim before I really had a chance to think about it, so for now, I'm just going to leave it. I just puttied, caulked, and painted the trim around the brick, and it was finished. I know this isn't like a major update, but this is really neat to see as you walk in the front door of the house, and it really adds some like old world character to our kind of basic new home. The color ties in nicely with the green accent wall in the dining room, and it adds some interesting texture to the space. I really enjoyed putting this together, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you can't wait to see all of the other upcoming projects I'm sharing, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks again to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to check out the links to see what they have to offer below. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!